Hi folks, welcome to the first Math 118 video. And so throughout the course, I'm going to be making some short videos to help us along with some of the content that we're learning, just so you can see some examples, but also talk a little bit about why this stuff is important and how we can use it in our lives. So we're going to start off today with percents and examples. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is what is a percent? All right, so let's take a look at that. What is a percent, right? And we can think about it in sort of two different ways. If we were to sort of go back to maybe some sort of pictures that we saw in like elementary or middle school, maybe we saw some sort of pie and then it was cut in half. And then someone might say, how much of this circle or pie is shaded? And we would say 50%, and that would be correct, right? Another way we could think about it is 1 out of 2 pieces is shaded. So we have half or 50%, okay? And if we sort of practice that idea with maybe some other types of percents, if we were to divide this into 4 equal pieces, and now I said, oh, you get 1 of the 4 pieces, we could say 1 out of 4, put that into our calculator, and we get 0.25. But if we want to turn that into a percent, we can also think about that as multiplying by 100. And so 0.25 times 100 would give us 25%. Okay. And we could kind of keep going in this way. Let's maybe try one more example. But let's say that we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8 pieces. Let's assume that I drew them all equally. And if I said, hey, you're going to get 1, 2, 3 of these equal size pieces out of 8, we would say, well, Judy, that's 3 out of 8. And if we put that into a calculator, let's see what we get. All right, so let's do 3 divided by 8, and we get 0.375. But if we multiply that by 100, we will get 37.5%. Okay, and so what we're looking at is we're really just saying, like, how much of the whole do we have? In other words, we might just call a percent as a fraction where we have the part over the whole. Now, I think I just said a really bad word. I said the F word. I said fractions, and that's something that I think a lot of us might feel really nervous about. But I think I want us to think about like the concepts behind it. All right, we can use a calculator for all of these computations, but really thinking about like what does it mean? I think that's the real important takeaway here. Okay, so a percent is really part over the whole. We multiply it by 100 to tell us like how much of the whole thing we actually have. All right, so that's a quick introduction on what is a percent. And now I want to talk about sort of like my main use. All right, so here's my favorite use for percent in my life. Okay, so my favorite use. Now, sometimes I like to go out and eat in a restaurant, right? Most of the time, I probably go to the grocery store, I pack my lunch and my breakfast, I do a little bit of meal prepping, but once in a while, I like to go out to a restaurant. And you know, in this day and age, that that tipping is a big thing. And usually when you go out to a restaurant, you're looking to tip about 20%, okay? And so being the math teacher, when I'm out with friends, my friends are always like, well, how much do we have to pay for tip? Now, I tell them just take out a calculator and figure it out, but here's a way that you can actually do this in your head, okay? So let's say that you wanted to leave 20% tip on a bill that was like $35.29. Okay. Now, if I wanted to use my calculator, what I would do is I would take 35.29 and I would multiply it by 20%. All right. But since we don't have a percent button on our calculator, we're really saying 35.29 times, and maybe you remember from your earlier learning days that 20% is really the same as 0.2 because I'm going to move that decimal 2 places. So times 0.2, and let's see what that gets us. So 35.29 times 0.2 will give us about $7.06. Okay. So if I were doing this or making my friends do this at a restaurant, I would just multiply by the decimal version. I'd move that decimal over 2 places. Okay. But if I, for some reason, left my phone at home and I wasn't using Apple Pay, I had to pay with cash or maybe an actual credit card, and I wanted to sort of figure out how much tip, here's what I would do. I would actually take the bill, 35.29, okay? I actually don't need these parentheses. And I would move the decimal 1 place. All right, so move 1 place. And I would move that just 1 place to the left. Okay, so that would be 3.529. Now that's kind of a gross number. I don't really want, if I'm doing this in my head, I really want to round this to sort of a nice number. And so I'm going to round it to 3.50. 50 is kind of close to 529. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to times it by 2. So 3.5 times 2 gives me about $7. Right? And so we can see that like when we did it in the calculator, we got 7.06, but when we did it by hand, we got $7. So, so it was sort of a good way to estimate it, okay? But I can do this with any bill. So let's say that my bill is spending a little bit more money now. Let's say we have 178.54. Right? So if I practice this trick, I want to find a 20% tip without my calculator, I'm going to move that decimal 1 place, so 17.854. I'm going to round 17.80. And then I'm going to times it by 2. So 17.80, since these numbers are big, I may actually want to round this to just 18. It's close to $18. 18 times 2 gives me $36. And so I should pay a tip of about $36 if I want to pay a 20% tip. Okay, so this idea of moving the decimal place, rounding, and then timesing by 2 is a great way to estimate 20%. Okay. All right, so let's try this on a different example. This one might be something more aligned with sort of the questions you'll see in your homework, okay? So it says, at a restaurant, the bill comes to $72. You decide to leave a 15% tip. How much is the tip? So in this case, they're asking for 15%. That would mean we would have to times by 1.5. That's a little bit harder for me to do in my head. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my calculator to figure this out. Okay. So over here, we did 35.29 times 20%. We had to move our decimal and then we could put it into our calculator. So let's think about what this would be here. So our bill is $72 times 15%. Okay, so 15%, we really have moved that decimal 2 places to the left is 0.15. And let's put that into our calculator and we get $10.80 for a tip. Okay. So let me get this all on one screen for you right here. But basically, when we're thinking about tips, if we're thinking about the classic 20%, this move one decimal round in times two might be a nice trick, but we can always just multiply by the percent as long as we remember to move that decimal two places to the left, and that will give us how much extra we have to pay. Okay. All right. Now, the second thing that I really like using percents for is when I go shopping, especially if I'm shopping for something more fun, like maybe clothes, or I'm into outdoor stuff. So maybe I'm looking for some new outdoor equipment. But whatever the price is, I want to know what I'm actually saving if there's a sale, and I actually want to know how much I'm going to have to pay. And so for those of you who purchase things, which I think is most of us, though not all of us, but we might buy things every once in a while. Maybe we really try and think about it on sale. And so this is going to be a way to help us figure out like how much we actually have to pay. All right, so let's start off with this first example here. It says that a TV set was originally priced at $1,200. Last week it went on sale for 40% off. What is the current price of the TV? Okay, so we're going to do this two ways, okay? Now, if I think about 1,200 and I want to find 40% of it, I can move the decimal one place, so 120. And this time I'm going to times it by 4 because I want to find out how much 40% is. Okay, so times 4, and I get $480. Okay. Now, if that seems a little bit magical, let's kind of do sort of the regular method, which is we take the full price, 1,200, and we multiply it by 40%. And if we do that, we're going to end up with 1,200 times 0.4. And when we put that into our calculator, lo and behold, we're going to get $480. Okay. So you can always just multiply by the decimal, totally fine. But if you want to start to think about ways to do it without your calculator, that's just another way. Okay. But here's the thing. This doesn't say how much do you save. It says how much do you pay, right? And I think a lot of times when we think about sales, we think how much we're going to save, but it's also nice to know how much you're actually going to pay. And so we could sort of do a step 2 where we do the original price minus the sale price, which will tell us that this TV, we would only pay $720 for the TV, okay? Now, here's the deal. You can find the sale price or find the sale amount and then subtract. Always works. But if you're looking for sort of a more straightforward way to think about it, let's do this. If I save 40%, I have a 40% off sale, how much do I actually pay? Like what percentage? I have 100% and I'm going to save 40%. So I don't have to pay that. 100 minus 40 gives me 60. This means I pay only 60% of the actual price, okay? So here's what we can do. We can take our $1,200 and we can times it by 60%. This will just give us how much we have to pay. It doesn't tell us how much we saved, but it will give us in one step the current price of our TV, okay? We put this into our calculator. We end up with $720, all right? Just like we found in the first part. So both ways will get you to the same number, but this way in the blue might be just a little bit faster, where you subtract that percent and then you multiply, okay? All right, let's take a look at this next question. A store has clearance items that have been marked down by 55%. That's like my favorite time of day. When I walk into a store, the things that I want are already 55% off. And then they say that there's an additional 20% off those items. So on top of the 55%, I save even more money. I save another 20%. Now, this question says, what percent of the original price do you end up paying? Now, I know this might seem tricky because we don't know how much the items are. Seems like we don't have enough information. Turns out it doesn't matter because we're just saying like how much of that price will we end up paying, right? So it's almost like, it's almost like this. It doesn't matter how big my circle is, I'm still just paying only part of that circle. Okay. So let's go back down. Let's take a look at this. All right. And we're actually going to use this trick in the blue that we did in the previous problem. Okay. So if clearance items have been marked down by 55%, that means they were 100% to start with. They're marked down by 55%. What percent do I actually pay? Well, 100 minus 55 is 45. So 45% is what I pay. But then it turns out that those clearance items are an additional 20% off. Okay, well, what's 100% minus 20%? Well, that's 80%. Okay, so the extra 20% means I only pay 80%. Okay, but because I get both deals, I actually have to multiply these. All right, so when we have 45% times 80, whoa, 80%, and we multiply those, and that means that we're going to do 0.45 times 0.8, which gives you 0.36 or 36%. All right, so whatever that item was at the end of the day after both sales, we only pay 36%. Right? That's pretty cool. That's like them saying in the beginning, oh, you have 64% off altogether. That's pretty neat. All right, let's take a look at one last example here. It says Veronica's Violin Village sold 1,000 violins in the month of July. In the month of August, they decreased their sales by 250 violins. By what percent did they decrease their monthly sales of violins from July to August? And so to answer this question, we're going to go back to our original definition that a percent is nothing more than a part over the whole. Okay. And so how much did they decrease by? Well, that was 250 violins. And how many had they sold in July? Well, that was 1,000. And if I put this into my calculator, I'm going to get 0.25, but that's not the percent. We still have to move that decimal place and we get 25%. Okay. All right, so I hope that was helpful. Take a look at that homework. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you later.